I'm Andrew Young. I really came down here because Martin Luther King was moving back from Montgomery to Atlanta in 1960, and he really didn't have any staff. I was working in New York and with the National Council of Churches, and somebody wrote me a letter asking if I would be interested in coming back to Atlanta. And I had a very good job, and I had just bought a house, and my wife had just gotten her master's degree, which was the blessing of New York. And because the tuition was only $16 a semester. And so we saw John Lewis in the Nashville sit-in story on television. And right after the first intermission, she said, "It's time for us to go back home." And I said, "We are home." She said, "No, this is New York. New York can never be my home." And I said, "Well, where are we going?" She said, "Somewhere south, anywhere south." And long story short, I ended up in Atlanta working with a literacy program, but my office was right across the hall from Dr. King. And his biggest problem was that he didn't have any staff. It was basically just him. And his secretary asked me, would I help him answer his mail? And then she gave me a great big box of letters that people had written him. And I was staying at the Butler Street YMCA. So every night I answered 50, 75 letters. And his secretary typed them up, and he signed them, and he was amazed. He said, "How does he know what I want to say?" And I said, "I don't know. I mean, I've read your books, and I know what you've been doing, and I went to seminary too, so I was guessing." He said, "Well, it's exactly what I wanted to, what I should be saying." And that's how he and I got close. And so it's just continued from there. And everything I did, nobody else wanted to do. Nobody really wanted to work with him. I mean, they were killing people right and left then. And we know about Emmett Till, but there were many others like that that never got the publicity. And of course, he was one. He had been stabbed. His home had been bombed. He'd been kicked out of the National Baptist Convention just for trying to do what it took the society a long time to realize was the right thing to do. And I was one of the few people that was tagging along, and Sonona Clayton was there. And we managed to create a movement. And most of the people who did most of the work, nobody knows their name. And that's why I'm always embarrassed when I'm given an honor, because I just managed to stay alive. One thing Sonona Clayton and I have in common is we both made it to 90. And but she started out, her husband started out as Dr. King's publicist, and he was a journalist. And she worked with Mrs. King. So I've had a blessed career, but everything I've done, nobody else wanted to do. And I did it because nobody else wanted to do it. And I've been blessed because almost all has worked out. And it's worked out really well. I mean, I get my little ego trip when I remember that when I came here, well, not when I came here, but when I became mayor or congressman, the tallest building in town was the Hyatt that had that little flying saucer on top. And when I look at the skyline now and I realize that many of those buildings, I was at the groundbreaking and had something to say with the whole development, the airport, the Olympics, all of which were our way of integrating. We were not only talking about integrating, but I went to, well, I'm almost afraid to say it because I don't think people know that that airport is run mostly by black people. And it's run well. And the year before last, before COVID, it had a $66 billion impact on the economy of the city, of the region. And I've seen Atlanta grow into Atlanta. And, well, when Dr. King was arrested, when he first got here, he was arrested by the sheriff of DeKalb County. Now the sheriff of DeKalb County is a beautiful black woman. And when I met her, I said, you know, forgive me, but I just need to hug you. And she said, I said, I never hugged a sheriff before. But to me, that's a pretty complete transformation. And I'm just blessed to have been a part of it. I'm glad you recognize that all this stuff that you see around this city didn't happen by accident. But there were many people who made sacrifices, who had visions that people thought were crazy. Like, everybody thought the Olympics was actually crazy. My parents got upset with me because they thought that they had paid for my education and I had a good job up north, and why are you coming south? Because all of their friends from Montgomery and across the South didn't see any future in the civil rights movement. They thought the Montgomery bus boycott was one and done. There'd never be another thing like that. But that led to Albany and then Birmingham and then Selma and then a Nobel Prize for Dr. King. And I ended up as a congressman. One thing I'll say that I'm most proud of is that when I was elected to Congress, it poured down rain all day long and all the night before and till after the polls closed. And the only reason I got elected was 74% of the black community turned out to vote in a pouring down rain. And we got to do it again because we've got to win this governor's race, and we've got to send Reverend Warnock back to the Senate. And we've just got to keep the country moving forward. And that's not any individual, that's basically Atlanta. And you, as a part of young Atlanta, emerging in your leadership roles. We've done the best we could, but at 90, I'm not ready to retire and I can't quit, but I don't have that much energy anymore. So I do what I can, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But when I was your age, I was working 20 hours a day.
One good question I have for you is that Martin Luther King is known for the quote that says, "The art of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." How do you think that we as citizens play a role in bending that art towards justice?
Well, I tell you, I don't know where that quote came from, except that Dr. King used to use it all the time. But it's not a good description of the human rights struggle. The human rights struggle has always gone up a little bit and then down, and then up, come back a little higher, then level off, and then something happens and it goes down. And when we're not losing ground. And if you look at money, we built that airport with no taxpayer money. We put on the Olympics with no taxpayer money. We have kept this city going on vision and energy, and it's not just racial. I mean, there's nothing particular about Atlanta's racial progress. That we put in a lottery. Anybody could have done that. But what we did was we fought to see to it that every penny of the profits from the library, from the lottery, go into education. And so Georgia State, which only had 400 students when I was mayor, when I became mayor, they now have 53,000. See, you got at least 500,000 college students in and around Atlanta now. That was a big fight, which we won. But we won it in such a way that the blessings went to the 500,000 students that are now Hope Scholars. And with the Olympics, 42% of all of the money that we put into the Olympics, and it was $2.5 billion. None of it was taxpayer money. We found ways to raise it, but 42% of it went directly into black businesses. And it's been a constant struggle. I was upset at the fact that they removed the All-Star game from the metropolitan area of Atlanta. Because, yeah, Cobb County used to be scared to drive through Cobb County after midnight. But Cobb County now has a black majority, on the county commission and a black sheriff. And when they took the All-Star game away from the Battery to punish Cobb County, they were punishing black folk that had just emerged into leadership. And I told them I was just being flip. I said, well, we got to get the All-Star game here next year. And they said, no, it's going to be at least 20, 24 before they can come. I said, well, the hell with it. We'll just have to win the World Series. And we did. And now the Braves are, I think yesterday they had 12 games in a row. Now, everything isn't going that way, but enough is going that way. But everything that's going that way, everything that I see going good, there's somebody black who would never have had this kind of chance anywhere else in the country getting it done. And last night was, it was night before last, was the Hallmark channel had a story about a couple that had Down syndrome was getting married. Well, that was very creative and very moving. It's the best movie I'd seen, love story I'd seen since the thing called Love Story 50 years ago. And there's a young black woman from Atlanta high schools who is now in charge of that Hallmark station. But it shouldn't be a surprise that she's doing so well, because her daddy and Hank Aaron were the ones that brought the Braves here, and he was the general manager for the Braves during the years when Hank Aaron was getting us started, and he was going around here in the country recruiting all these pitchers. Most of the pitchers happened to be white, but he was a young black man putting together a baseball team that is running well to this day. And though we don't have as many black baseball players as we did, we got more basketball players. And so it's when you say the moral arc is long, but it bends toward justice, that was Dr. King's way of saying another thing that he quoted: truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. But the scaffold sways the future, for behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. And I don't know that there's been as crazy a time in my 90 years of life as it is right now. And I'm scared for the country. I'm scared that people are living a lie and proud of it. They celebrate their ignorance and their racism, and they celebrate evil. But Dr. King also said that Jeremiah's time, he raised the question, is there no God? Is there no balm in Gilead? And he said black men and women straightened out Jeremiah's question mark into an exclamation point. And they said, there is a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. There's a balm in Gilead that heals a sin-sick soul. And so I think that the faith that brought our people, black and white immigrants, almost everybody that came here as an immigrant and treated the Indians badly, except us. And my parents and relatives were from Louisiana, and they ended up in the swamps of Louisiana, sort of integrating with the Indians, and sort of because it was such bad swamp land, just like the mosquitoes and malaria kept Napoleon from conquering Haiti. The oppressors couldn't get too deep in the swamps of Louisiana, and so a lot of things went on that that for the most part turned out pretty well. And it seems like, well, when I came to Atlanta, we didn't have 1 million people, and that was in 1961, and we're now pushing 7 million people, and they're better educated, they make more money, we got a better quality of life. We still have problems though, and the problems are as big percentage-wise as they were when we were less than 1 million. But we shall overcome. But the struggle has to continue. And that's why I'm proud to be associated with BlackPush, because you keep on pushing. Remember that song? Keep on pushing. You gotta look that up. That was where Push came from, I think. Mayfield and the Impressions. They had a song that we used to sing in the early 60s, Keep on Pushing.
And one last question, Ambassador Young. For those young people out there, right, who are just as vigorous as you guys were back then, what would be your message to them to tell them to keep on, as you say, keep on pushing?
Well, my daddy raised me. I mean, I grew up in New Orleans, and I was in the middle of a mess. I mean, I had an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on the next. The Nazi Party was on the third corner, Highland Hitler, and a Chevrolet dealership around the fourth corner. And I was right smack in the middle. And they had other black families, but none of them had children but my parents. And I guess I heard from the time I was 4 years old, don't get mad, get smart. If you lose your temper in a fight, you're gonna lose the fight. Your mind is the most powerful thing you got. And when you get angry, the blood rushes from your mind to your fists, to your feet, and they are not nearly as powerful as your mind is. And you have to develop your mind and your thinking and your praying to get through all this mess. And nobody told us that the way would be easy. But God said He didn't bring us this far to leave us. So struggle on.
Thank you for everything. And thank you for everything you've done, even not just today, but everything you've done throughout history. And we are, I have to speak on, thank you for everybody. We're privileged just to even be here holding this conversation with you. So thank
Well,
you for your time.
no, I'm around, and I have been, well, and I'll say, not bragging, but the one picture I have with Dr. King that I don't like is we missed a plane in Jackson, Mississippi, and he was sitting there nervous and frustrated. And the janitor came along smoking. He said, "Excuse me, brother, you got another cigarette?" And the janitor gave him a cigarette. And so he's sitting there smoking. But for the most part, he didn't smoke. And none of us drank. And we didn't fool with drugs. And well, he used to say that, well, the way he put it was, you have to be clinically insane to think that a handful of crazy young black folk like us can change this whole nation and even the world. And he said, we might not make it to 50, but if we make it to 50, we got to make it to 100, because it's not going to be easy, and it's a lifetime struggle for justice to prevail, even in a country like this. Well, as you know, he didn't make it 40. He was killed at 39 and just turned 39. And yet his spirit has never left us. And he's probably more popular. More people have read his works. More people quote him, something from him, now all over the world. There's no place you can go in the world where people don't know what Martin Luther King stood for and who he was. So he's not gone. His physical presence left us, but he left his spirit to inspire, to energize, and even to inform generations yet unborn, but particularly this generation now. And nobody told us that the way would be easy, but I don't believe he brought us this far to leave us. I'm proud to be associated with BlackPush, and that means if you're honoring me, you got to keep on pushing.
Thank you so much, sir.
In fact, push, when Jesse Jackson started using it, was people united to save humanity. And I don't mind BlackPush, but I think the world's really too sick for all of the healing to be done by black folk. And the last thing Dr. King did, what he was doing on his way to Washington for the Poor People's Campaign, we had 26 different nationalities at Pascal's in January. And there were 3 or 4 Hispanic groups, there were poor white groups, sharecroppers, there were Asian, urban whites, urban blacks, rural whites. I mean, we had 26 different organizations that were going to Washington together because we realized that no one group could change this nation. And I think that's true for this election coming up soon.